if you missed it, and if this applies to you, our student ministry kicked off this Friday, and that was super fun. Friday the 13th, we were here, we were playing games, and I got to tag along for week one. I got to bring a bit of a challenge or encouragement to our kids on how to kick off sort of their fall on the right foot, and they were patient with me. I'll confess that as I was doing it, after I was thinking, and I was feeling a little bit like Billy Crystal and City Slickers. Do you guys remember City Slickers? It's a classic, and I'm a Billy Crystal fan, but this is the part. So Billy Crystal plays this 40 or 50-year-old who's going through a bit of a midlife crisis, and they don't really do this a lot, but he gets invited to a career day at his kid's school. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? So he's there with other fathers who are like police officers and firemen and all that kind of stuff, but he sells advertising time on a radio station, so slightly less exciting, and he's feeling self-conscious, and so in the midst of this thing, he sort of stumbles into this sort of self-pitying monologue where he says, value this time in your life, kids, because this is the time in your life where you still have your choices. When you're a teenager, you think you can do anything, and you do. Your 20s are a blur. Your 30s, you raise your family, you make a little money, you think to yourself, what happened to my 20s? In your 40s, you grow a little pot belly, and you grow another chin, and the music starts to get too loud, and one of your old girlfriends from high school becomes a grandmother. 50s, you have a minor surgery. You call it a procedure, but it's a surgery. 60s, you have a major surgery. The music is still loud, but it doesn't matter anyways because you can't hear it. In the 70s, you and your wife retire to Fort Lauderdale. You start eating dinner at 2 in the afternoon, you have lunch around 10, breakfast the night before, and you spend most of your times wandering around malls looking for the ultimate soft yogurt, and muttering, how come the kids don't call? How come the kids don't call? In the 80s, you'll have a major stroke, and you'll end up babbling with some Jamaican nurse who your wife can't stand, but who you call mama. Any questions? I love that movie. It's such a classic. I love that movie. Value this time in your life, kids, because this is the time in your life where you still have choices. Well, I don't know if there's ever a time in your life when you don't still have choices, but I do know that there are times in your life when the choices that you make are important, right? That's obvious. Do I ask that girl to marry? That's pretty important. Do I get the mole checked on my cheek? That's also pretty important. Any of you here want to admit to having ever made a really bad choice? Yeah. A few of you are like, Buckle, last week, you have no idea. It seemed like a good idea at the time, maybe, but it was a bad choice. So like deciding to spray the hornet's nest in the daytime. Yeah, not a good choice if you've tried it, and you only have to do that once. I find that during those times when you're standing at the crossroads, it's a good idea to decide in advance what you're going to do in those situations, should those opportunities open up in front of you, so that you don't have to wrestle with that decision. You set up some boundaries in advance. Now, I'm not your mama, but son, you need to decide not to do certain things before you get into the opportunity to do them. And I think it also works both ways. There are some things that you need to decide in advance to do in case an opportunity comes up. So you don't have to wrestle with doubt or apathy or whatever. Let me give you some examples. Kids, maybe not kids, like maybe some of you have ambitions, not kids. In 2061, Halley's Comet is going to come back. So just drop whatever you're doing. Like if you're still cracking at 2061, stop whatever you're doing and go see it. That's pretty impressive and pretty rare. Just decide now, I can't wait to go see Halley's Comet. What about something maybe more realistic? What about a short-term mission trip? Why don't you decide now that you're going to go on a short-term mission trip someday so that when an opportunity comes up in front of you to do that? What about this fall, go to the Oktoberfest at the Schwaben Club? And maybe you'd never associate that with it, just do it. But boy, it's a good time. Luana and I went to the Oktoberfest. It wasn't the Schwaben Club. I don't know where it was. Was it? It was good fun last year. You should decide this in bed. You gotta decide that there's some things that you're just gonna jump in, and you're not gonna entertain doubt, and you're not gonna wrestle with apathy or things like that. Does that make sense? The stuff that doesn't come along every day. Why? Why is it important? Because I think it's a good idea to set up some predetermined responses in your life. Predetermined responses. And the predetermined responses that you set up actually become sort of guiding principles for your life. If you do this, set up some predetermined responses, they are going to become guiding principles for your life. Do any of you guys have a guiding principle for your life? Maybe I'll call it a rule of life. Do you have any of those? Guiding principles for your life. How about, just like your mama said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Right? I know I sound like your mama if she said that. Maybe your mama didn't say that. She should have said that to you. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Some of you fans of Benjamin Franklin, he had a good one similarly. Remember not only to say the right thing in the right place, but far more difficult still, to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. That's just good advice. That's the good advice. Make that a guiding principle for your life, because these are the things that are shaped not just how you live, but who you become. Does that make sense? These guiding principles, predetermined responses, shape how you live and who you become. Well, for the last couple weeks, we've been working our way through a series called A Sky Full of Stars. We're talking about a challenge that the Apostle Paul gave to a church that really was not all that much unlike our church, to shine among them like stars in the sky. Shine among them like stars in the sky. And in verse 16 of Philippians 2 says, as we hold firmly to the word of life. So what are some of the guiding principles for life that can help us to stand out in a sea of beige? What are the predetermined responses that we need to lock and load so that when we come to crossroads, the decision's already been made? That happens more often than you might be aware. Many of the choices that we've made up to this point have shaped us. They've shaped the kind of church Erin Village is. And we are who we are because we live by a set of guiding principles. These are lines drawn in their sand. They're boundaries that we say we're gonna go this far and no further. And they also, these predetermined responses, say there are some places we will never go. We will never go. So if you missed it, in week 1 of our series, we talked about what it means to be a we church, not a me church. A we church, not a me church. And so for the church to thrive in small towns, this is my conviction, there needs to be an equal commitment to embrace diversity so that we can welcome everyone who comes, and also to guard unity. So equal commitments. Embrace diversity and guard unity. And we do both of these things so that people are welcome into our midst, but that people can also recognize that we are under the banner of the Lord Jesus. We recognize Jesus. And he really is Lord and center of all we do. So we talked about last week what it takes to be a growing community from Philippians chapter 2. Paul reminds us, work out what God is working in us, right? The point of that is people don't often drift in the direction of growth. Do you guys know that? People don't often drift in the direction of growth. They have to work on it. And so we think these biblical values, the things that we're talking about in this series, have the power to transform our region. They have the power to transform our lives as well. We know that we're not able to do everything well at Erin Village Alliance Church. And so we've decided that we have to try and focus on a few things in order to have the greatest impact. I actually heard a pastor named Willie George describe this as the axe principle. So if you take an axe and you swing it and it hits the tree on the flat side, it bounces off, you get rattled, it may even break the axe. Useless, right? If you take it and hit an axe at the butt side of the axe, right, the thing, you're going to do some damage, right? It'll be a big thud, but it doesn't compare when you take the axe, obviously, and you put all of your power behind the focus point, the sharp point of the axe. And so we want to be a church of focus so that we can be a church of impact. Does that make sense? We want to be a church of focus so we can be a church of impact. So grab your Bibles, please. Flip open to the Bible app. My notes are there. Philippians chapter 2 is where we're going to. Philippians chapter 2 again. While you're flipping, let me read to you what we've already talked about. From verse 2, it says, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united to Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Verse 3 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. In week 1, like I said, we talked about what it means to be united with Christ and united as a church. But we stopped before we got to verse 3. But one of the things that I love most about Aaron Village Alliance Church is that a long time ago, you guys decided that you were going to put an intentional focus on an even disproportionate investment in the next generation. This happened long before I got here. You were investing in young people. Young people were playing on the worship team. Young people, older folk. I'm going to say older folk in case you're feeling like Billy Crystal right now, a little midlife crisis. Older folk investing in the next generation. That's just part of what makes you different. And I think it's Christian. I do. I think the investment in the next generation, the disproportionate investment, I think that's Christian. I think that's part of what made Christianity a movement. So to the church in Philippi, remember, a church not that much different than us. Kind of probably this letter was written the same age as we are, 20 some odd years after the birth of the church. Paul says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. So what does that look like? Selfish ambition or vain conceit. Actually, I looked it up for you because I found this interesting. Paul borrows a term. Electioneering is the term. Electioneering. Do you guys know that? Yeah, I'd never heard of electioneering, even though you can kind of guess it is. But have you guys ever seen House of Cards? Some of you would be embarrassed to say I've seen House of Cards. And some of you, you've heard of House of Cards. It's a Netflix special. It's massive. It's massive. I can't recommend it. I couldn't actually finish it. It's just too discouraging all the time. Okay? It's dark. It's dark. There's no heroes in House of Cards at all. So I'm not going to recommend it to you. But I'll tell you that the show's about selfish ambition and electioneering. This show is about electioneering. It's about a couple, and it's not just that they're trying to climb the ladder of political office. They start sort of, I don't know if he's like a governor, a congressman, or something like that. And by the end, he's president, and maybe even in the last season, she's president. So it's something like that. It's not just that they're climbing the ladder, it's that they'll say and do anything to get it. Like, anything to get it. There were so many times watching this show, my jaw hits the ground. I could not believe what they did, what they said. That's the word Paul uses. Do nothing out of selfish ambition. That's electioneering, vain conceit. One of the most creative and honestly disturbing theatrical devices that they use is called breaking the fourth wall. Does anybody take drama class? Anybody remember that? The fourth wall is that invisible line between the audience, the observers, and you on stage. You never break the fourth wall. You never look at someone in the audience. You ignore them. They don't exist. You just carry on with the thing. In this show, they break the fourth wall, and it's creepy. He kind of looks at you and then describes to you what's going on. He looks at the camera, just like that, and I know I got that. It's freaking me out. Every time I'm looking at this, I'm going to have nightmares of Kevin Spacey now. Why is it disturbing when he looks at the camera and gives commentary or tells you what he's thinking, even though that's not what he's saying in the dialogue? It's disturbing because he's a snake. Like, he's a snake. We're not used to hearing people express openly selfish and manipulative stuff. And this is all that goes on in his head. And so it's a disturbing thing, even on our best days, guys. Even on our most well-intentioned days, it can be hard to recognize when we've started drifting into this kind of thought pattern. And so hearing him say this stuff is disturbing, and then getting confronted with, wait a second, did I just have that thought? It can be disturbing in our own lives too. But I'll tell you, it's rare. It's rare to recognize selfishness in yourself because it's kind of hidden. Why is it hidden? Because we don't want to think of ourselves as selfish, and because we've gotten really good at sort of clothing our selfishness in fancy clothes. Do you know what I mean by that? We wrap our selfishness in altruism, right? We project our desires, for instance, our selfish desires on someone else so that we can selflessly fight for their best interest. Right? No, this isn't about me. I'm just here to serve, Sean. I'm just here to serve. It's not about me. We project our desires on someone else. Our brains actually camouflage this stuff, selfishness, in confirmation bias. Have you heard of confirmation bias? It tells us that, we're actually defending the weak here. We're actually standing for the truth. Someone needs to stand up for the truth. And besides, everyone feels the same way as I do. I'm just saying it can be hard to tell. It can be hard to recognize selfishness in ourselves. James chapter 4 talks about it. He says, you don't have because you do not ask God. And when you do, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on yourself or your pleasures. Have you ever thought about that? Well, of course I want to spend what I get on my pleasure. I wouldn't ask for it if I didn't, maybe. I guess there's a few things I might ask for or pray for that really aren't about me and maybe are for others. But of course, and remember, folks, everything you have ever been told is that you do want a George Foreman grill. And your life would be better if you had a George Foreman grill. And there's no one on earth that deserves a George Foreman grill more than you, Casey. Do you spend a lot of time measuring your motives? I know some of you are like, I love my George Foreman grill, Daryl Buckle. You do need a George Foreman grill, Daryl. I wish everyone had a. Thanks for thinking of me. Thanks for thinking of me. Do you spend a lot of time measuring your motives? Do you spend a lot of time measuring your motives? Do you know that God does every day? That's a weird thought, isn't it? It's a weird thought that God actually spends time, that he considers us in relationship, our prayers, our hopes, our desires, he measures our motives. It's crazy. I think to grasp this, we need to recognize that anytime we feed or anytime we fortify our interests, sort of at the expense of or instead of God's interests, we start to look like everyone else. I think that's really the culture these days. I think that's everyone. When we feed and fortify our interests, we're just like everyone else. We live in a consumeristic culture where we're told you deserve, you want, and you should have what you want, and you should work hard to attain a freedom, what did I hear it called? Financially independent. You should be independent, financially independent, where you have everything you need or could want, and you don't need anybody else to give it for you. Paul says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Yeah, selfish ambition or vain conceit. It seems like everywhere we look are people who would lie to get ahead and who love to be right. Right? Lie to get ahead and who love to be right. Selfish ambition and vain conceit. So, don't get sucked into that. That's what Paul's saying. That's the ocean of beige. Stand out in that ocean. Stand out in that. How do you stand out in your community? He continues, in humility, value others above yourselves. Have you ever heard knowledge puffs up? Have you heard that? Knowledge puffs up? Sure you have. Have you ever met someone who's too big for their britches? Yeah, that's a good one. Too big for their britches. I like that one too. In humility, value others. Why did I say those things? Because humility shrinks you down to size. You're like, Daryl, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Older translations of this actually call, instead of humility, they say lowliness of mind. Lowliness of mind. Am I saying that right? Lowliness of mind. Daryl, doesn't matter if you're saying it right. It doesn't actually sound like fun. Lowliness of mind? I mean, why would you want to think low of yourself? What's wrong with being confident? Isn't that a major problem in this world? People who think too low of themselves. It's not actually about being confident. This isn't actually about being insecure either. It's a posture that you take. It's a posture you take. It's not an identity or a self-perception. It's a posture that you're willing to take, where you defer. That's what it means. In humility, consider others. In humility, defer. So what do I mean by that? Here, take my seat. You ever given up your seat? You're in a small group, you got the comfy seat because you got there early, because you wanted the comfy seat. And somebody comes, you're like, all right. Or you're on the bus or the thing, and an old lady with her cane's there, and you're like, she's faking it. She's not really need that cane. She just does it. She gets a good seat. It means defer. What about at the grocery store? Right? When you're waiting in line and you accidentally pick the wrong line, because you do. You profile the checkout lady, and that guy looks like he's quick. I'm going in that line, and you don't notice the person behind you who's got 2 items. Yeah, and you're like, all right, you've only got 2 items. Why don't you go ahead of me? That's what it means to defer. Or, hey, Esther, you know that the drive to the cottage is only 2 hours long. Why don't you play your gangster rap for the whole trip? Go ahead, Esther. What? Go ahead and you take over the playlist. I'm good with that. In humility, we defer. In humility, we defer. Humility says, not my will, but yours be done. If you recognize that, it's part of a prayer that Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Did you guys, obviously, most of you recognize that? The night Jesus was betrayed. He was soul-searching and praying in a garden called Gethsemane. It's not the beginning of Jesus' prayer. You guys know that. It's the end. Yeah, this is the highest point in his inner conflict. Was he going to be able to go through this sacrifice for us? Was he going to save himself, or was he going to save all of us? And so he prayed these words. He's like, Father, I'm afraid and I feel alone, and I don't know if I want to do this. It's conflict. He's looking over at the meathead sleeping under the tree. God, I don't know if these guys deserve it. Like, they can't even stay awake for 5 minutes to be with me as I told them what was going to happen, and it's coming. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. That's what Jesus said. This is the picture of humility. And it's going to take nothing less than Spirit-filled, cruciform faithfulness if we are going to stand out in a culture defined by allegiance to self, right? It's going to take that. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take a cruciform humility to stand out. In humility, value others above yourself. I can think of 100 reasons to put myself first, and not just because I'm looking at you guys. I can think of only 2 reasons why you should put others, if you should value others above yourself, because Christ modeled it. That's what happened in Gethsemane. He modeled it, and then, of course, he commanded it. In fact, in Matthew 22:40, Jesus says that the whole law and the prophets, what does that mean? Everything that's right, everything that's true, everything that is moral, everything that's ethical, everything that appears just or right. There's no higher pinnacle, devout Christian, faithful church attendant. There's nothing better, higher that you can do than love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. I don't think Paul's escalating the greatest commandment when he says value others better than yourself. And I know that there's a difference in language. Yeah, but Jared, you're supposed to love your neighbor as you love yourself. I don't think Paul's contesting that. Of course you need to love yourself, but I think he's showing us how to do that. And the best way to love your neighbor as you love yourself is to value them, value others above even. I think he's telling us what the greatest commandment looks like. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. What would that look like? Not looking to your own interests, each of you to the interests of others. When you love others, you value their interests, right? Go ahead, Esther. Gangster rap, no problem. You want them to feel love, so you create environments in which they can feel, where they feel welcome, they feel known. Environments where they feel thought of. Wow, you thought of me. That's enough itself. I can't believe you thought of me. That's what was on my mind after we sang Reckless Love. I bet there's somebody here who didn't know God was thinking of them. Who didn't know God thinks about them and loves them and pursues them with his love. That's what it is. We create environments where people feel thought of and loved, but I was also reminded of that conversation that, like, I'll say it's a conversation that we know on TV, although maybe some of you have actually heard this said, and so this is really fresh for you, and if that's you, I'm really sorry, okay? If this is fresh for you, I've been through it, okay? I've been through it too, so I'm sorry. You know the conversation where guy meets girl, and guy likes girl, and guy asks girl out, and they go on a couple dates, but she's not interested, so they have the talk. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? It's the talk, right? Listen, it's been really nice getting to know you, but... And then she says, you know what she's going to say next? It's been really nice getting to know you, but... Do you guys know? Oh, that's it! Did you say it? It's not you, it's me. And that's supposed to be like skillful breakup talk, right? That's supposed to be as gentle and gracious as it's supposed to lessen the blow, and on TV, that's pretty smooth breakups. It's not you, it's me. It's not you, it's me. That doesn't work well when we're talking about what Jesus is talking about, right? Just imagine that same thing. God brings people into your life, into your sphere of influence, but you're not interested. So you're like, no, it's not you, it's me. I'm just not that into you. I'm really just into me. Yeah, it sounds terrible. Doesn't that sound terrible? That's not graceful anymore. You know, Paul said, I've become all things to all people to perhaps reach or win some. All things to all people. Me? Yeah, I'm just not that into you. Yeah. In verse 19 of Philippians chapter 2, Paul actually says, I really hope to send Timothy to you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. Did you guys know that Timothy got circumcised as an adult so that he could more effectively minister or reach seeking Jewish population? Yeah, listen, I am so not that into you. Yeah, so. What's at stake when Paul says this stuff? What's at stake? What if God did a work in my life so that with humility I would value others over myself? What if God did something in my heart so that I was always looking not only to my own interests but to the interests of others? What if God did that same work in each of us, each of you too? I think we would love differently. I know that seems like a weak answer. I think we would serve differently. I think it would look differently. I think we would spend ourselves serving and clearing the path for the next generation so that they can thrive, so that they can succeed. And even after saying all that, the problem with all of this, it is so apparently understandable. Of course we would, Daryl, if I was really that selfless, of course I would love better than I do. It's easy to illustrate, it's easy to understand, it's easy to explain, but Paul says if you can't change your mind on this, nothing will change. If you can't change your mind on this, nothing will change. In verse 5, in your relationships with one another, in case you didn't know what he's talking about, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself, nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself. He lowered himself. He stooped down and became obedient. Do you remember last week? Obedience is the word listening. He heeded the call, the need. He became obedient to death, even death on a cross. I think in good marriages, there's a bit of a negotiated give and take to support a satisfactory mutual self-interest. I think in great Christian marriages, both spouses find this incredible completeness based on a mutual lack of self-interest. They would do anything for the other, and the other would do anything for them. I think that's good to great. I do. I think it's good to great. I think there's a difference. And you're like, Daryl, but, a mutual agree. And there is, for sure there's give and take. For sure there is, right? For sure there's, no, let me get the door for you. No, you don't have to, I'll get the door for you. Hey, can I get you a cup of tea? No, I'll get it. No, I really don't mind. I'll get it. There's negotiate. For sure there's that. I just think it's good to great. I think there's a difference. This is what Jesus did. And listen, in great Christian marriages, by the way, they do sometimes struggle. Even great Christian marriages struggle sometimes. Why? Because dying to self and sacrificing for another is hard. Can we just admit that for all of us? Dying to self. Someone's elbowing their husband right now, and it's just like, do it when you get home, people. It's hard to die to self and to sacrifice for another. It is. That's what Jesus did, though. It's what he's still trying to do in us. Do you need me to say that again? what Jesus did for us, he's still trying to do in us. What Jesus did for us, he's still trying to do in us. Jesus endured the cross for you, and part of Jesus' redemptive work in our lives is to get us to the point where, for the joy sitting across the table from us, we will endure a cross even, for the sake of that other person, for their joy alone, not for our own, not for what we can get out of the relationship. We're willing to endure the cross for others. For others. He's trying to do that in us. That's his redemptive work in us. Whether they're people that we're married to, or people who live across the street from us, or who are the kids or the students that are growing up all around us. Folks, if our church is going to thrive, if our church is going to shine, we have to invite Jesus to change our minds. We got to invite him to change our minds until it's transformed our posture in our relationship. Is that fair? Yeah, we just need him to change our posture so that it changes who's welcome around here, and it changes how we worship, it changes what we talk about, it changes how we serve, it changes what we give, it changes why. Why? And why is it? Because you know what? God is most glorified in my life when I'm spending myself for those he came to save. I actually think that. He's most glorified. I think I'm growing up most when I give my life for his mission, and that means my life becomes cruciform. I'm willing to carry a cross. I'm willing to sacrifice for the people he's trying to impact. And that's actually why we came to the table today. To remember the Jesus who made himself nothing. To remember the Jesus who washed his disciples' feet, who sat alone in the garden and prayed, "Not my will." Philippians 2 tells us that when we come to the table, we come to bow the knee. We come to bow the knee, and when we bow the knee, God changes our minds. When we proclaim the Lord's death, when we come to the table, we're saying, Jesus, you're Lord still. You're Lord of my life. I'm coming. I'm not just coming to receive. I'm coming to say, to remind myself and anybody else, he's Lord. When we bow the knee, God changes our minds. And God wants our mindset to be like Jesus in all of our relationships. Jesus who in humility valued other above himself. Jesus who lived every moment of his life not looking to his own interests, who spent his last hours living and dying for the interests of others. Church, we shine when in the name of Jesus we bow the knee and honor one another.